I ignored everyone's advice, and I took the advice of the nice Filipino girl at the casino when I was in Tampa, and I purchased an AVO Juvenzian. We'll see how it is. And then tonight I am drinking Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 from this sweet old bottle. My dad had it in his basement and I stole it from him. I don't know if it's just the age. It tastes like there's a lot more to this than normal Jack. Like, something good going on in here. I was remembering back to my first season deer hunting, and I was thinking about all the things that I kind of wish that I had done differently, because obviously as you start out, you learn more things, and I wanted to tell you some of the things that I wish I would have done differently. So if you're new and you're just getting started, whitetail hunting, just think about some of the stuff. Number one, I wish I would have hunted out of a ground blind instead of a tree stand. So you're learning a new skill, like you're used to shooting whatever in your backyard, in your front yard, on your farm, but you're shooting flat, presumably. And then all of a sudden, you're going to transition into now shooting 20 feet out of a tree at an angle, facing down, maybe seated, maybe standing, probably wearing different clothing. You may have to shoot offhand, like where you're actually kind of pointing over to the side. Here you may have to shoot straight up. There's just a lot of different factors to consider. And I feel like adding the tree stand in there isn't necessary. And I think that a ground blind can be advantageous to a new hunter for multiple reasons. I also think that you're more conscious of the wind when you're hunting out of a ground blind. If it's snowing, you can go in the ground blind. If it's raining, you can go in the ground blind. I think you're going to have a more of a propensity to go in. And then the other thing is just movement. You can move around a lot more. Like if you got an itch, you can scratch. It takes less discipline to sit still inside of a ground blind because you don't necessarily have to. I'm curious because I lit this cigar maybe 2 minutes ago. Let's see if it's actually still going. I'd say it's a slight upgrade from a Swisher Sweet. Just kidding. It is actually pretty sweet though. So yeah, I wish I would have hunted out of a ground blind instead of a tree stand. The other thing is just the expense. A ground blind is cheaper. A couple of ground blind tips just real quick. Don't sit right on the window. Like it's very easy to want to get right up in the window so that you can see out. You feel like you've got a better view of the deer because presumably you do. You have to sit back in the blind so that you can actually draw your bow. You've got to raise your bow up and then be able to draw. When I set up in a blind, I'll test it out, knock an arrow, and then draw back. And I basically get my back elbow, touching the back of the tent. So I say tent because they basically are just camo tents. Another tip is sit a little sideways inside the blind. So think about it. If you're sitting straight forward and you want to draw, are you doing this? Or are you having to kind of wiggle around when the deer comes in? I just think I've found it easier to kind of offset that seat a bit and then be ready to draw. Another thing is don't open all the windows all the way around you because again you're giving up that forgiveness that a ground blind offers of the deer not being able to see you. And maybe I'm just the moron who did this where one day it was like hot in early season. I was like, open all these windows. And basically the deer were just coming up behind me, seeing my head kind of moving around because I was basically like I was skylined where they could just see me all the way straight through the ground blind, just kind of doing whatever, looking at my phone, scratching my balls, whatever. Probably going to cut that part out. Probably going to leave it in because I'm too lazy to edit it out. The next thing that I wish I would have done is I wish I would have hunted thicker places. Like I wish that I would have limited my shot distance by hunting in thicker setups. Finding a really great deer trail on a ridge or on a tee or where they're transitioning from, bedding to a field, those kind of areas and really limiting your distance, your shot distance, doesn't mean you're actually limiting your ability to see deer because they obviously have to walk through thick stuff to get out into an open field. And the issue that I had my first year was I set up on the edge of a field and the deer would come out and they'd go up to 50 yards. And I'd be like, man, 50. I think I could do a 50-yard shot, but I probably shouldn't. And so they'd come into 40, and then I'd probably still be like, 40's too far. I've got 20, 30, 40 on my pins. I practiced at 40, and I can hit the block, but it's real inconsistent. And they would never seem to come to 30, so I took two 40-yard shots the first year whitetail hunting. I sent them both over the back of the deer. I just think if you're hunting tighter stuff, you have a more realistic chance of getting a deer at 20 yards that you're actually going to be able to get a shot at. Because again, you're in the ground blind, you've got a little bit more freedom of movement without the deer seeing you, and then you've got that discipline that is kind of in place because you can't shoot farther than 30. Like you just be shooting into brush or shrubs or trees or whatever. So something else to consider. I tended to hunt at night more than in the morning, just because my work schedule was such that I would get off work a little bit early, and then I would come home, I would change, and I would hit the blind. What I noticed was I've got, legal shooting light. Basically, you can hunt 30 minutes after the sun goes down. I couldn't see my housing that late. Like I drew a couple of times on animals and just realized, like, man, I don't know where everything is lining up. I can't make this happen. And so I realized for myself with that particular setup that I needed to not hunt that late. Like I just couldn't see anything. So if I had a big buck walk in front of me, I may have taken a riskier shot. Very risky, because when you can't actually see your peep and your housing, the odds are something's going to go bad. So I wish that I would have been a little more conscious of that, and just knowing and being disciplined for myself, saying, you can't see now, you should get out of the tree, or you should get out of the blind quietly and start walking out. All right, so those are some of kind of the preliminary thoughts. So let's say you get a deer, it walks out, and you've taken your shot. I wish I would have used lighted nocks my first season. And I know that it kind of messes up your FOC a little bit, but to me, the compromise is 100% worth it. Adding that extra grain on the extra grains on the back of the arrow, to have the ability to see your arrow flying through the air and then see where it actually hits the body of the animal, is, to me, it's almost imperative. Because if you're new, you're going to immediately question, like, I missed, or I totally got him. Like, maybe you're way more optimistic than I am, and you're going to say, nope, I nailed him, totally got him, not a problem at all. But if you have that lighted nock, the combination of watching that arrow fly through the air and then the auditory, the pop when you hit a chest cavity of a deer, there's an audible thud that is different than an arrow hitting the ground or hitting the tree. And as you hunt more deer, you will become accustomed to that sound, and it will be the sound of victory. You'll be very glad that you heard that sound. So, lighted nocks. The second part is the arrow. You have to find the arrow after you take the shot. Okay, you don't have to find it, but it is so handy if you can actually find it, because you walk up to that arrow, and there are 4 different types of blood, goo, internal things that will end up on that arrow. I'll post a chart here so you can actually kind of see. These tell you where you hit the deer if there's a question. Lighter red blood with bubbles means you lunged him. A lot of blood maybe means you hit through the heart. A darker blood, maybe you got the liver. And then green with a really strong smell, kind of a slimy feel, means that you hit guts. And those things are super important to know, because that's going to roll into the next part, which is, when should I start going after a deer? This part kills me, because, hold on. This is so much better. I don't have to worry about this thing. It's just staying lit. This cigar tastes like if you took a Swisher Sweet and you made it, they were like, you know what, we're going to make like a $5 Swisher Sweet. Not a $1 Swisher Sweet. It's really sweet. It's very light. But this I will probably not buy again. This, however, Man, something interesting happened in that bottle. It doesn't taste like Jack that you just buy off the shelf. I don't know what it is. If you know what that is and it's fancy, comment below and let me know. The first deer I shot, it was a doe, and she walked in. I was actually using a crossbow, and I hit her, and I knew that I had hit her because I saw it was light enough that I saw the arrow hit, and I saw the doe run, and I was like, yes, yes, I did it. And I immediately climbed out of the tree, walked through the woods where I thought she was, and she jumped up and she took off running. So I had to search for hours before finally I found her, and she'd gone hundreds more yards. I hadn't hit her great. I don't recall offhand what the actual hit was, actually. Regardless, if I would have just left, she laid down 50 yards after I shot her. And she would have just stayed there and she would have expired. But because my stupid ass jumped out of the tree, just excited, because I'd always rifle hunted before where you shoot them, you hit them, they're dead. It's not quite that way with an arrow. It takes a little bit longer sometimes. I climb down, she runs away. We've already talked about this. I am repeating myself. I apologize. I think you should give every single shot, unless you can see the deer go down, I think you should give it 30 minutes. That's what I think. I think 30 minutes is a good time because it'll also allow the adrenaline to lower down. I think it's just a good amount of time for you to wait and sit and then go, not look for the deer, find your arrow. So get out of the stand, go find your arrow, and look for those indications that I'm talking about. What type of blood, what type of internal moisture do you have on the arrow? Backing up just a hair. When you take your shot on the deer and you watch that deer run off, make sure that you watch it and mark mentally, like, okay, it ran right past that big oak tree and that's where I didn't see it. That's where I stopped seeing it, right there by that big oak tree, because that's where you're going to start your track. And this is another thing that I messed up where, again, I'd just be so excited. The deer would just run off and I'd be like, it went to the left. It's left. I don't know. Left. Use your eyes and your ears. Shoot the deer, watch the deer run, and then listen. And in the area that I'm at, there's a lot of big maple trees that drop a ton of leaves. So when the deer actually expires, they hit the ground and they tend to kind of kick. They call it crashing. The deer will crash and the deer will kick, and I can hear those leaves shuffling. So I've got a visual of where the deer went through the trees, the last sighting that I've got, and then I've got kind of an auditory marker as well. Like, okay, that sounds like it was right over here. And I've gotten really good at using those two things to basically kind of triangulate where the deer ended up being. It's to me, it's really, really important to have that starting point. And then if you hear the crash, there's a little bit of a victory because you know that that deer went down quickly. You made a great shot, ethical shot. The deer is down and you're gonna have meat in your freezer. So let's say I've waited my 30 minutes. I go out, I find the arrow. The arrow looks good. It looks like the type of blood that I'm looking for. It's got bubbles, or there's a good amount of blood on it. If there's no appearance of gut shot, I'm probably at that point going to go look for the deer. If I've got the two good shots where I know it's either heart or it's double lung, I'm gonna go look for the deer after 30 minutes. If I've got guts, which I've done twice, there's this balance of it's going to take them time to expire. And you want to try to find that balance between pushing them and bumping them because they'll stand up and they'll continue to move, and then letting that meat spoil. So you kind of have to know your climate and decide, are you going to push it a little bit more and go a little bit slower, a little bit earlier, maybe only wait 6 hours or 4 hours even, and see if you can go really slow. I'm talking like binoculars through the thick stuff to try to see the animal laying down, work upwind, and take a bedded shot on the deer as a follow-up. It's super hard to do. It's super hard to do. Luckily, the two deer that I did, that I gut shot, I was able to let them lay for 12 hours, and then was able to go find them. And both of them had run maybe 100 yards and then laid down. But because I was quiet, got out of the stand, looked at the arrow, realized what I'd done. They went, they bedded down, and then they expired. I not, it's a, always felt really bad when it happened. But I think if you hunt long enough, it's going to happen. So a gut shot deer, you got to wait 12 hours. If it's a liver shot, like really dark blood, I think you're probably going to want to wait 3 or 4 hours for that one too. I think it's going to bleed out faster, but it's not going to be as quick as a double lung or as a heart shot. So I would just wait a little bit longer. Oh no, did we go out? I ain't going out. I'm about to cheat.
What's happening right now? This is super weird. It's not giving me smoke. Maybe my... I'm so good at this. I'm so good at this.
The best part about all of this is this audio is going to be probably unusable because it's a little bit windy, and I forgot to put the wind muff on this little, son of a bitch!
Right there.
Alright, listen. I'm going to upgrade my setup. Don't you worry. Nobody fret. I had one dude offer to send me some stuff. It's okay. I got this. I'm learning. I'm new. I'm not going to appreciate the stuff in the way that I should. I've got to start at the bottom, work my way up. So the last thing that I wish that I would have done early on was when you hear the crash, rather than going and finding the blood trail and then slowly tracking that blood trail, I started later on just going basically to where I thought I'd heard the crash. The areas that I hunt in are pretty thick. There's a lot of honeysuckle that's on the ground, so I can only see maybe 20 yards around me, like 10 yards on either side. But I've found more deer in the first 15 minutes of looking by just going to that spot that I thought the deer had crashed in and finding them. So I'm not wasting a lot of time messing around with the blood trail. That said, if I can't find them pretty quickly, I'll go back to the blood trail and then start to track. A deer that is hit high through the lungs, like especially if you're on the ground, they take a while before they start to bleed, and they may not even bleed that much because that whole cavity can fill up with blood before it starts spraying out those sides. So if you are finding little specks of blood, that's not necessarily a bad sign. It's hard to track, but it's not necessarily a bad sign. So every single deer that you shoot, every single one, if you find blood, you have to spend as much time as possible trying to find that deer. Follow the blood trail until you can't find it anymore, and then start doing circles and make those circles bigger, or start doing lines. Follow logical deer tracks. If you see leaves that look kicked up, or there's tight spots that it looks like a deer could run through, and then everything else is just completely covered up. You know, we have lots of briars and stuff like that, raspberry bushes here. They'll have little slots that they're going to cut through. Like, just if you don't see anything, go cut through on that and keep looking. I'm going to go back to the previous video where we did this before, and you guys all made a bunch of recommendations, and I'm going to order some of the cigars off that list. I did attempt to purchase them. I was at the casino. I asked the girl, I was going through the list, and she looked at me like I was not speaking English, probably because most of the ones were not English cigars. I'd like a Avo Gondenziario. I'm going to do a better job of getting better cigars, and I appreciate the recommendations, and obviously if you have more recommendations for booze or cigars or archery tips, what did you guys learn that you feel like was kind of one of those moments where you're like, oh, that was kind of stupid of me. I should have known that. Like, that's kind of common sense. What are those things that happened kind of early on in your deer hunting career that you think could help people? So that way people can go read through the comments and maybe pick up a bunch of stuff that I didn't say in this video. Well, I'm going to sit here for the next probably 20 minutes. I'm going to smoke, I'm going to drink, I'm going to enjoy the rain that is coming in. I'm probably going to watch TikTok videos on my phone. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Brandon McDonald.